sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor early in the morning? The sun is on the other side of the shop. It's also getting a little cloudy, so that makes it a little bit easier for me to work. But this stuff does set up quickly, and so I do have to work fairly quick, and I can fair in this fiberglass tape to the hull. I'm more interested with the sides initially than I am on the bottom, because that's the side that's going to show. Basically, because I'm in a time crunch, I will do the whole thing if I can. I have to have this boat finished for a charity auction that I'm donating the boat to. I'll put a little hardener on there, get this stuff mixed up, and a little scrap piece of plywood I'm using. You can use anything. A lot of times I use pieces of cardboard. Once this is mixed, it does set up fairly quick. And when it's hot out and you get the sun on it, it's even faster. So you don't have a lot of time. But if you leave it spread out thin and not all bunched up, then you have just a little bit more working time than you would otherwise. And I'm going to apply it like so. Now, I could have mixed more, but it sets up so fast. You can just mix this up in small batches and you're better off. Otherwise, you'll end up wasting a lot of product. You can see what I'm doing here. I'm filling in the weave of the fiberglass tape, but I'm also filling in just below it where it's going to be faired. Now, this is only a primary application. Once I'm finished going through the whole thing, I'm going to end up, I do a primary sanding, I'm going to go do one more skim coat. That should be enough to do it. It really shouldn't take any more than that. If it does, it's just a question of learning how to use this stuff and getting a little more practice. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix a little bit more, and I'm just going to keep on going. It's going to be pretty boring watching the whole boat, so I'll shut off the tape now. Okay, I've completed spreading the schmoo all around, and I've got both the bottom and the sides coated with the first coat, and I'm done for the day. But tomorrow this will all be cured. I can give it a sand, and then I can see what it needs. Just maybe a light skim coat with a wider trowel, very, very thin, going over it. Places, find low spaces that were missed, but that's probably all we'll need, and then one more sanding. Well, good morning, folks. Starting a new day, and I'm just kidding. I'm not going to make you sit through watching me sand this whole hull. I've got a couple of hours ahead of me of sanding, and I'll be back when I'm done. Okay, after doing a whole lot of sanding and creating all kinds of dust, I wiped her down. Then I went over the hull, and I started checking for little imperfections. Sometimes you don't fill all of the little voids and things with the filler. And normally I'd do a second coat of filler, then a thin coat, but I'm really pressed for time. And so I like this product here. It's called, this is a product by 3M company called Acryl Blue Glazing Putty. And you usually find that in auto body shop supply stores. The product number is 05964. This works really well with any of the polyester fillers, but it'll bond to just about anything. This you don't have to mix. So I can go along, putty knife, fill in any little imperfections. It'll air dry. It's a solvent cure. The solvent evaporates and this solidifies. It only takes a few minutes, and it's already hard and you can start sanding. This is a critical point. I don't want to remove all kinds of filler, and I don't want to cut into fiberglass or anything. So I don't use a power sander here. I just take a scrap piece of sandpaper, put it around a wooden block, and I just start lightly sanding by hand. This stuff comes off fairly quick. what I do is I use my hands, I use my fingers for feel, and I can feel the differences if there's a surface flaw. And because this stuff dries so fast, if you miss something and you feel something, you can just dab a little on a putty knife, spread it right out nice and thin, and within a few minutes you can go back over it until you get it to the point where you're happy with it. So I'm going to complete, I've already filled the imperfections that I found, and I'm going to go ahead and finish sanding it. Pretty soon we'll be getting a coat of paint on this hull. It's afternoon. I finished all my sanding. I wiped her all down. I blew her off with the air hose and then went over it with a tack cloth to get all the dust free. I finally got some shade. Got a little pop-up canopy, so I'm not in direct sunlight. I don't have any primer. I don't want to go out and buy any, but I have a full quart of the finished paint, which should be more than enough. So this first coat in lieu of primer is just going to be the regular paint, but that'll work fine as a primer coat. When it dries, I can go ahead and sand over it and touch up wherever I have to. Not meant to be finished right now anyway, because when I put the boat right side up and I install intermediate frames, there'll be some more holes drilled in the side of the boat to put screws in from the side panels into the intermediate frames to help hold them in place while epoxy cures. And we'll be getting to that a little bit later on. Right now, I'm just going to apply the very first coat. And the reason I want to get a coat on now of some kind of paint is that'll help seal the plywood, make it a little bit easier to work with. So I'm just going to put the one coat on. We'll see how that works out. If I missed anything while I was fairing the hull, it will show itself a little bit easier when I get this coat on. I'm not worried about full coverage right now. As I said, this is not the finished coat. But I'm going to do the whole hull. It's an acrylic based paint, it'll dry quickly, and then I can turn the boat over and get back to work. Well, I have this first coat of paint on now, acting as my primer. It's soaked right into the plywood, and she's drying fast. And you'll notice I didn't put any paint along the gunnel. And the reason for that is because when I have the boat right side up, later on I'm going to be fitting the outwales right up against here, and it'll be glued to the outside of the hull, and it'll be screwed from the inside going through the side panel into the outwale, and you'll see how that goes a little bit later on. But in order for the epoxy to bond to the wood, I wanted to make sure that I left the wood bare, so I didn't bother to put any paint on there for now. And again, this is really just acting as a primer coat. And right now it's just about dry to the touch in most places, a little bit tacky in others. So within about an hour or so or more, I can come back out here and I can turn her right over and keep going. Okay, I've spent a couple of hours this morning. After last night I did a bunch of filling in here, all the blemishes. Spent a couple of hours this morning doing all my sanding. And you want to do as much finish sanding now as possible before you put the rest of the structural components and cosmetic components into the boat, because right now everything's open, it's easy to access, and it'll save you a lot of time. You spend more time sanding than doing anything else, and if you wait until later, it'll take you twice the time to do the sanding. What I'm doing now is I'm going to install what we call intermediate frames. This is the main frame. On this particular boat there's only one main frame, but on some of the larger ones there are more than that. And then in between the main frames we have intermediate frames. The intermediate frames help tie in the gunnel and the chine together. It's a structural component, but it also helps, it's a place to put what we call risers, horizontal cleats that hold the thwarts. Thwarts are simply seats. The seats get to rest on those. You can also tie lines to them and do other things. But now remember that we have an angle here between the bottom and the side. And we also have a chine here. Well, then the plans will give you the distance of the intermediate frame. Where is the intermediate frame going to go? The plans you can reference from the main frame, measure back. In this case, it's 16 inches from the back of the main frame. This point right here. This is the same material that I used for making the main frames. It's the same width, it's the same thickness. What I'm going to do, I want to put it right here in place. But of course I have a bevel and I have a notch for the chine that I have to cut. So we want to get the bevel first before we cut the notch for the chine. This is a scrap piece of plywood which is the same thickness as the chine, and I'm putting it just right on top of the chine, as you can see. And now I can lay this flat against there, but I want to know what that angle is. What is the bevel I'm going to cut on the edge here? So I take my bevel gauge. The handle of my bevel gauge can lay flat against this plywood I have. I'm using it as a shim. And I've got the blade flat and parallel against the bottom panel. That gives me the angle how I wish to cut the bottom of this piece of wood. And that way there, it will fit nicely. And then from that point, I can take the measurements I need and cut the notch for the chine. As I have set the angle of my chop saw, so now I'm going to cut the proper angle. I need to cut here. And now I'm going to go and check it, see how it looks on the boat. I'm checking it in place. Looks like it fits pretty good, close enough to perfect, I think, especially when I go to epoxy this together. But what's left now is I need to make a cutout so it'll go around this chine and it'll fit right up against the side panel. I'm going to mark it a little bit below the top of the chine because this is angled down a little bit. I don't want to cut off too much and have a big gap. So I'll mark it just, maybe 1/8 of an inch down from the top. Then I'm going to come across with the square. I'm trying to keep this in the camera shot. I don't know how I'm doing. I'll put that across. That'll be the proper angle of the top of the chine. Now I just have to take the thickness of the chine, which is pretty much what I have right here. Just line it up with the edge. So this is what I'm going to cut out, and I'm going to come back and try it and see how it fits. Well, I don't know if it'll show on camera, but I've got about, a little more than a 1/16, maybe a little less than 1/8 of a gap right here. I'm just going to cut a little bit right here, just a smidgen, and then check the fit again.